So this is the 90-90 squat or the shin box position. This has become very popular in the last few years. As I wrote, I sort of became familiar with it in the early 2000s, learning from people with martial arts backgrounds because it's a position they would use quite a bit, which makes sense because martial arts is a athletic endeavor that requires a lot of hip mobility to create rotational power. Now, people have made it like a mystical exercise. It's not really that. We're just going to go over some basic fundamentals of what we can learn about this position. For some of your clients, all we simply want to do first and foremost is see, can they sit in a nice tall position like Jessica's doing right now? If they're trying to get in this position, it's causing massive discomfort where you're seeing tension in the face, grimacing, and great discomfort, then we're going to see the nervous system shut down. So, example 2 is if Jessica has to lean or put her hands on the ground to keep in that position. So if we're in a position like this, it's going to be very hard to do a lot of work from this position because we're in so much discomfort that our nervous system's battling the position. What I really want to see is mostly this back leg. Can we have that leg come down towards the ground, that internal rotation of the hip that most people lack? Can we be in that position comfortably? And we want to sort of compare it from side to side because we might have a situation where Jessica's very good in this position. If I ask her to switch the legs, she's still pretty good, but she might find one side more uncomfortable than the other, which is normal. But I want to see, can she sit normally on one side, and then she has to compensate when she gets to the other side. When we see big differences in mobility from side to side, that's when we know that our body's probably creating rotation in a bad way. For example, when we're squatting and when our pelvis has to be neutral because we have difference in mobility from side to side in our hips. So again, I'd rather her be equally immobile than having a big asymmetry in mobility from side to side. But this is a great starting point. So basically all we're doing at this time is seeing if rotational training is a good choice for her. As I sort of wrote in the manual, if she is at that position where she has to lean and create stability on the ground, then we may not go into true rotational training yet. We may spend more time in anti-rotational training to build up the core stability and create that connection to the chains that will give her that mobility by that proximal stability. So all we're doing right now is saying, is rotational good for her? Can she sit in this position comfortably? And use this as a measure of progress over time. In 4 to 6 weeks, we may measure her again if she had problems at first, and can she do this better? So it's a great way for your client to see changes in their movement as well as you getting feedback about the level of preparation you have for certain movement patterns. So if your client is terribly uncomfortable in the bottom of that 90-90 squat position, does that mean we can't use this position to our advantage or use it to help improve their mobility? And the answer is obviously no. What we can do is use a different level of the movement to help actually build that internal rotation because mobility can become somewhat specific and we can train it by creating proximal stability in specific joint angles. So meaning if Jessica comes up to her knees, this position is usually doable by most of your clients. So the only issue you're going to deal with is just making sure their knees are on a comfortable surface. So from here, you're going to see us do a host of different patterns, and we're going to build from this position down to the shin box and show you how we can improve mobility in the hips by focusing upon that core stability and connecting the chain specifically of lats, core, and glutes. So you're going to find that we're going to use different tools to create that tension that's going to give feedback upon the body. And you're going to be surprised how fast people can improve. And you may have clients that even they start off that segment of the training, they can't be in this position. And by the end of using the series that we're going to go through, maybe 1 or 2 of these exercises, after a few sets, they're actually able to get in that 90-90 squat position much better. Okay. The same token, don't force people, don't rush people. Let them, build up success over time. You're going to have time that you're combating lots of hours sitting, or possible injury situations, or possibly just lack of usage and familiarity with the movement pattern. So again, this is not a competition to see how fast you can get people to improve, but again, use it as a means to build success and build wins for your clients. So one of the great ways we can actually build anti-rotational strength and connection of those chains is using a power-off press in the 90-90 squat position. So again, just to review, a power-off press is any time where we have a lateral force trying to pull us in rotation and we're resisting it as we create a long lever arm with our arms. And as we've talked about throughout the program, the better part about using the ultimate sandbag is really twofold. One, engaging the grip allows us to engage the lats and the core to a higher degree. Secondarily, we get not just a horizontal, but a vertical force acting upon the core as well. So it just enhances the effect of the pow-out press. Now, for the sake of this, we're going to work from the top position of the shin box. So what Jessica's going to do is she's going to come up first, and she's going to notice that she's got her hands upon the middle of the ultimate sandbag. That's a good baseline. She's going to concentrate on trying to break the handles apart. And as she does so, you see how her shoulders pack and her lats become engaged. She's going to create tension in the ground with her feet, and she's got lateral band tension. So as she extends straight out, it should look like she has no band attached, meaning she's not being pulled in rotation. She's pressing down to press out, just like we went through our pressing module. That she's creating a straight press out from her belly button, not her chest. So remember, don't allow people to elevate the implement just because it feels heavy in the hands. And that they're not just trying to push the weight out, they're trying to drive down to create that tension through the glutes, the core, and the lats to start building up that strength. And you'll be surprised how that starts to help that internal rotation of the hip. Now you're going to want to make sure to do this on both sides. And you can try it with one side, with one leg forward one side, and you can switch it up. Just go ahead and just switch your legs up, Jess. And you would do it from this side as well. So again, when you're going through the movement, make sure, because this is a lot of neurological training, that we're keeping the reps kind of low because we're also having high tension. So 3 to 5 repetitions initially when you're introducing this to a client is very appropriate, because this is going to be probably in their warm-up section. We don't want to create too much fatigue, which causes the nervous system to start to shut down. So at this point, we can create a little bit more stress upon the body, which means we create a little bit more core tension, which is always a positive thing when we're trying to create that proximal stability, but not necessarily going heavier, because the lever arm of pressing the weight out and the band tension is going to make it very difficult to go up in weight. We're going to change where the position goes. So Jessica's going to go from a pow-out press into an overhead chop. Now, a couple of important things is, as she goes into the chop, she wants to keep breaking the bag because she wants to keep her arms locked out. So when she's overhead, she's still pressing down to press the weight up. So as she presses out, she's now going to create that tension. So now I'm making sure her ribs don't elevate, which is doing a great job because she's pressing down, and then she's going to pull it back into her body. So she's pressing out from the belly button, coming over the crown of her head, and see how her arms stay locked, even though the weight is pulling her off to her left side. Nice job, Jess. So a lot of times people get, focused upon the task, which is just trying to get the weight overhead. So they break in their elbows, they start to elevate with their chest, they forget the principles that we're trying to teach, which is tension into the ground and into the weight to create that stability, so we don't see those compensations of movement. If you're having problems with that, then stay within that pow-out press, build up some tolerance and some strength, and you'll see that it will greatly enhance making progressions like these that go a long ways in building that core stability. So again, using different tools allows us to create different types of stress. So again, the pow-out press and the chopping action with ultimate sandbag is a great starting point because we get so much tension and feedback. Something else we can take advantage of as a progression, because it won't give us as much feedback, but it will give us a unique movement pattern, is using the lever bells in a very specific way. So what Jessica's going to do in a moment, she's going to go a hand mixed grip. So that means hand over the top, hand supinating like this, and we're still going to start from that belly button area. So it's important to realize whenever we're going to create a pressing out type of motion, we never want to elevate the implement because it's going to be very hard to connect those lats. So Jessica's going to come up, and what she's doing is first starting with a very moderate position. Okay, obviously, the closer the ball end is towards her body, the easier this is. So you can use a lightweight and start to make it heavier. We'll show you in a moment. But what she's almost going to do is using a PNF type of pattern. So she's going to start in a press on it. She's going to rotate the bell up like so. Now in this position, she's doing a great job of trying to break the handle in half, keeping tension in that lat, and then she's going to actively pull it back into her body. Okay, let's try it again. So again, you sort of see that diagonal pattern come into play where she's creating constant tension against the handle. And if she wanted to increase the intensity, all she would simply have to do is shift her hands so the ball end would be a little bit further away. Now you're not going to be able to program like, hey, move 2 inches than you did before, but during the process of teaching this movement, if your client gives you feedback that's pretty easy, you don't have to change the physical load of the lever belt. You can simply change the leverage that it's providing you. So hopefully you're seeing a little bit of that diagonal action, and then how she gets here and she's still creating tension. She's not relaxed. And you want to avoid the shrugging of the shoulders by trying to break down. So if you're breaking the handle while pushing down with the feet, you're creating a lot of tension in those lats, core, and glute area, which is all that we're trying to do. and it'll be amazing how that has a positive transfer to improving her overall. Right, so now that we enter in rotation, rotation happens to be one of the most fundamental human movements, and yet it still eludes most training programs. As we talked about in the manual, when people think about rotational training, they tend to just default either to wood chop motions or medicine ball throws. And those are both great reflections of rotation, but there's two problems that often are caused by that. One is just the lack of progression between the two. That the idea of a wood chop type of motion that we will cover is a nice foundational system where medicine balls are this massive speed, strength, or power type movement. There's nothing in between to help people segue to one to the other. So what we really want to do is establish first and foremost what we are trying to accomplish with rotation. So remember, we are rotational beings. Our fascial system is set up so that if we do most things that are powerful, throw, kick, punch, so forth, that we create rotation. And even if you're not an athlete, just the idea of fundamental human movement like walking has a rotational component because we work in opposite limbs. So what we have to understand is whenever we're talking about any of these movement patterns, we're talking about the movement of the body, not the load. So one of the things that we have to teach is that internal rotation of the hip. So for a lot of people, this is the hardest part about learning rotation. So remember, we have mobility at the hip and stability at the lumbar spine. So if I were to imagine a plank here, when I pivot, my plank does not change as I move. What most people do is that they have no sense of their footwork, so they'll do a couple of things. One is they'll simply just pick up their heels and feel like they're rotating because they've never done this motion possibly in their lives. So you'll have that, and you'll have to help people understand that that's not rotation. So anytime my chest leaves the movement, like breaks away from my pelvis, that's not good because that means I'm creating rotation from the lumbar spine. Secondarily, people will turn their foot, but they won't turn it with the intent of pushing down the ground. So if Jessica goes ahead and goes into rotation, you'll see that she causes a great crease in her foot and how the angle changes up her body so that she can maintain her plank. She has a bent knee. Now, a lot of people will get worried about that knee motion, but the difference is if she's actually creating tension in the ground, this knee is really stable. If she loses tension, then the knee becomes very mobile, and that's where we don't want to have force upon the knee. So we really want to make sure that people understand it's not a matter of just turning the foot, it's creating tension in the ground. That creates the chain reaction of the body. With that said, we also have to consider what's happening on the other foot. Most people have some limitations in hip mobility. So it's safer to say to have the other foot slightly turned out rather than trying to be completely neutral. That's going to be too hard for most people and can put problems with the meniscus on the opposing knee. So having that little turn allows you to keep some stability, but you have to understand both feet are active. So pressing the ground as we pivot. So we don't want, I call it jazz feet. We just want to turn our feet back and forth. That's not what we're trying to do. So this foot has to be stable as I come down. So I'm pressing with both feet. That's where my glutes become very active and my core starts to brace. So how do we teach all these things happening at once? So again, we're going to use certain tools for feedback and strength training. So we are going to begin with a horizontal sort of wood chop or rotational movement. The nice thing about the band is the band will give instant feedback to the lifter about where they're compensating, as well as you as the coach. And we'll go over some of those things as well. So what Jessica's going to do is she's going to grab with her outside hand first, and you can do this with a cable too, then the inside hand. Now what she's going to do first is try to create that tension. So she's going to try to hold that tension down in her lats. So if again you see elevation in the traps, then that means we're going to get shoulders, not lats and core. Now she's going to set a nice athletic stance. So that means knees a little wider than hip width. She's going to have sitting back in her hips a little bit. A lot of people, if they're too upright, they won't be able to create the motion. And she's going to slowly rotate and try to hit towards me. So notice how she has a nice tall plank. Come back down, nice and slow. We'll do a couple repetitions. And see how the trunk doesn't change, the shoulder position doesn't change. She's got that nice tight stability. So right now we're not importing the bag because there's too many moving parts for people. Now, using the bag, you'll see something that we will do later on, but we have to understand too that while the other tools may be able to enhance the movement, start working in layers to make sure people understand the movement pattern first is the utmost importance. Now, what we can do before we worry about adding load or speed or any of those is start to take advantage of full rotation. So again, we talked about the Serapi effect, and that means that I create more force if I go back before I go forward. So, for example, you watch a lot of baseball players, they just don't swing, they'll actually leverage back and then swing. Tennis players will serve by actually going back before they go forwards. Again, creating that elastic energy. So what Jessica's going to do, she's going to step a little further away, so she sees a little more room. So now she's going to actually start by turning towards me. See how that foot is already pivoted. This foot is set, she has tension in the ground, so as she comes across, she's going to shift the pivot from one to the other. Now you can really break it down into segments, so make sure you hit the middle point, which you did really well, because you want to maintain that brace, and make sure that you're creating tension in the ground. Make sure that both feet are equally pivoting as it's their time to turn. This is a great way to start building up that motor engram, or that pattern for people to understand when we do full rotation that we're actually going to end up doing both feet. Sometimes when people do things like medicine ball throws, you'll watch their footwork and their feet are completely planted because they're just worried about throwing the ball very hard and they're losing the essence of the movement pattern. So as we start to build layers to this, the footwork always is the most important because that's where we're going to look to see where the failure of the exercise comes from. So a lot of times when people struggle with rotational movements, we simply have to go back to the footwork, whether it's due to increased load upon the body, speed of motion, complexity of the movement. People stop moving their feet. So again, when in doubt, go back to the feet. They'll tell you a lot about the quality of movement of your client. So the band gives us a nice baseline just to focus on footwork and while having some feedback. Now what we want to do is we want to try to integrate as much of the body as possible. So now we are going to connect our ultimate sandbag to a band. First, let's go ahead and just establish that pal-off press position again. So here we can have a little soft knees. Again, just because grabbing the bag and trying to pull it apart, working from the belly button out. Very much like we did in that 99 position. Keep the shoulders down, grabbing the ground with the feet, press straight out, Jess. And again, if I give her a little feedback at the end, so go out. If I press down, she's got a nice tall plank. If she's letting her elbows square out and her shoulders shrug up, she's going to drop immediately. So again, it's all about owning that plank. So you can work on just that power press, especially if that 99 position, even on the knees, is just too much for your clients. Let's face it, some clients just don't like being on their knees. It just feels very uncomfortable. Once we establish that anti-rotational component, then we can take it into rotation. So all we're going to do is take the concept from the band, what we did with this power press, and combine them. So just going to create tension again. And remember, both feet are going to be active on the ground. She's going to have a stance a little wider than hip width, and she's going to be at that belly button height, and she's going to create that pivot. The pivot creates the press. And then she's going to pull it back in. So as she presses out, and give her a little feedback again, she's got a nice tall plank. If she has a bag too high up towards her chest, she's going to break very easily. So again, remember that the pivot is just an extension of the trunk movement. One more time, Jess. And that tension of the hand, being able to break it apart, is what keeps the Latin core engaged. And she pulls it apart. And what she wants to think about doing is driving that heel back in the ground really hard, because eventually we're going to carry this back to the other side and really optimize what that Serapi effect does in creating efficient movement throughout our body. So hopefully what you're noticing is that we're not really teaching you necessarily a ton of different exercises. We're trying to teach you how to use concepts of different movements in different environments. So we went through the 99 squat, the fact with the lever belt, that when we want to press out and rotate, we had an element of that rotational pattern, a diagonal pattern here, that we can take that now and use that advantage into a rotational movement. So what we're doing is removing some of the feedback that we got from the band and the ultimate sandbag, and because we don't want to rely solely on feedback, because in daily life and in sport, we're not going to always have feedback, and we can create more sophisticated movement, meaning we're removing some of that feedback. Now the nice thing with the lever belt is we can still create a lot of tension. So we're still having sort of an incremental baseline upon how we're progressing the movement. So similar to what we did before, we're just going to have the same stance. She's going to have that mixed grip. So she's got tension right now. So right now, if I'm pressing down the bell, she's tight. If she was to relax her shoulders, see, I can do it. So a lot of times, the mistake people make is they start moving before they create tension. That tension is that good starting point. So as she pivots, that's when she's going to create that press out again. So she's going to rotate towards me and press out. And again, if I give her a little feedback, nice strong plank, pull back in. She's pulling the weight back in. She's just not casually taking it back in. Again, let's pivot and press. Nice. And having this big sort of separation here and pull it back in just allows us to make progression, because if I simply wanted to make the exercise harder, I could actually have her hands a little closer together. So I could have her bring this top hand down, and when she goes back into it, it's a little bit more difficult, okay? So again, playing distance with the lever allows us to get a lot out of the implement. We don't necessarily have to have a lot of different sizes. We can play with the leverage and that tension technique that allows us to come out. So when she's actually in that fully rotated position, just like before that 990, she's really trying to break in. And watch what happens to my shoulders as I do so. That really tightens up the lat, the upper back, and makes my core really stable. And just like before, we don't want to rotate then press. So you'll see this a lot with your client. Rotate then press. That you'll feel a lot of shoulder. That won't feel nearly as efficient. Remember, just like in our pressing, especially overhead series, if you do this correctly, you're not going to feel a lot of shoulders. It's going to feel like it's coming from the ground through the core, and the fatigue is almost going to come from the lat and core than it is from the upper body and the shoulder girdle.